ensure that you are directed to the assembly point and the county store. That's all sounds fine. We're not planning anything, so if there is anything, it's a real thing. The only thing that's slightly confusing is the 10 grand for a mile of main staircase, but I guess we can all figure that out. Go that way towards the reception, if anything happens. So, yeah, I'm not going to say a lot. I did want to say welcome and to say how honoured we are to host this event. We're honoured because of our key speaker, Maria. I'll just briefly say something about that later, but also because of our relationship with journalism, which is such an important charity, doing such amazing work, and it is really an honour to be here. So it's good to see you all got up and here and ready. I just wanted to talk briefly at the university. Our values are about being progressive, being compassionate, being responsible, about valuing diversity, about fighting for equality everywhere. And to have a speaker like Maria, whose Nobel Prize is for fighting for freedom of expression, I think is critical at this moment in time in the world, but also particularly, just thinking about my own context, in universities and freedom to engage in events like this, to do things like this is really important. So that's good. But I'm also delighted to have the event here because of our students. So we've got some fantastic students. They'll be picking. I won't embarrass you asking to raise a hand, but it's brilliant to have people here, to have opportunities like this, through events like this, where our students can come and hear such important conversations, can come and network with the industry where they are hoping to succeed. Our students, as you will know, are diverse, are talented, are ambitious, and need every opportunity to be able to get stuck in and get engaged and make a difference in the way that we want them to do. So for that reason also, I'm delighted we're here. And you'll be pleased to know I've pretty much finished now, because you didn't come to hear me, did you? So thank you very much for being here. We're really honoured. Peter Bonfield, our Vice-Chancellor, who is in Tashkent at graduation with our partner university there, says hello and welcome too. And thank you, and I'll hand over.
Oh, thank you very much, Sally. That's brilliant. So, as Women in Journalism, we're delighted to have this fantastic venue as well, and really to be here with Maria. So Women in Journalism in the UK has been going for 30 years this year, and I think we can honestly say that of all the guests and speakers that we've had, not once, I don't think we've had anybody quite who has done what you've done, Maria, for free speech and for our job, for journalism. So we're just very proud to have you here. Thank you very much for coming. I'm sure most people in the room already know sort of a proper history of Maria's life, but we'll try and bring some of that out in the conversation. And also, I'm going to throw it open to questions quite early on, because I'm sure there's lots of things that you want to hear. You'll even get frustrated if I'm not asking those questions. I know what that's like. I think we really wanted to start because I'm sure everybody's already bought the book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. If you haven't, get a copy of that later on. But my first question I really wanted to ask, really, is this dictator that you talk about on the front here, Maria, is that President Duterte, who was the President of the Philippines until last year, or is that Mark Zuckerberg?
Yes. I think when we first started thinking about the title, in the end, if you go back to the early chapter, how do you stand up to the dictator? You can replace
Oh my gosh, okay. So sorry. So the dictator is actually anyone. I learned how to stand up to a dictator when I was in 3rd grade, which I think we did. Replace dictator with bully. And it's a simple thing, but in terms of what we at Rapper have fought, I've always said we fight impunity on 2 fronts. Rodrigo Duterte's drug war, which is where it started, and Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook, because in the Philippines, 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet.
Wow, that is amazing. So I saw that amazing statistic in 2017, it was 97%.
2017, it was
and it's now
100%.
people.
Yeah, less than a year after that meeting with with Mark. It became 100%.
And there's an interesting line where you say about how the Philippines is like a petri dish for the rest of the world and how the impacts of social media are going to impact all of us wherever we live at some point. Talk us through the effect you think Facebook has had on your country.
How about on the entire world? Because what happens to us happens to you. It just takes a little longer. But first of all, I have to say, that I have to quickly introduce to you two rattlers who are in the room. Leanne is the woman who traveled with the Marcos campaign and had to deal. Look how young she is. She is taller than I am, but
I'm old.
had to deal
I'm
with
old.
the kind of harassment and intimidation that I think Pedro is very familiar with from Brazil and Bolsonaro's campaign, where journalists are essentially sidelined. Right? We don't get to ask the tough questions anymore because they bring their own vloggers. And then Jane Brasher is our first sports editor. And we're giving the UK our vote. But sorry to go back to the question. What we saw happening, and it was in 2016 when we saw the data, and I think I was in Google. This is where I went to Google, and everyone looked at me like I was crazy when I said, these kinds of attacks, exponential attacks, is going to tear down what we know. And what happened? It's exponential bottom-up lies, and then once it seeds, like AstroTurf, it lays, it's fake. Our very first series, the weaponization of the internet, two of the three parts I wrote. The second piece was how Facebook algorithms impact democracy. The third piece, which my co-founder wrote, China Today, is about manufactured reality. And they manually counted how many 26 fake accounts, what's the ripple effect of 26 fake accounts? It took 3 months to do it manually because we didn't trust the tech. We first wanted the evidence. It influences at least 3 million other accounts. So that was when we began to realize this is, like Joseph Conrad, the horror. That's when we realized this is something that will erode everything we know. So it was easy, became clear it was easy to manipulate. And then by 2018, MIT came out with a study that said lies spread faster than facts. So we spend our careers learning how to tell compelling stories so that we keep your attention, so that you care. But we don't stand a chance. Journalists don't stand a chance in this distribution system. And that is really the fundamental problem. If you have a distribution system, the tech companies that have kicked us out, we're no longer the gatekeepers. If you think you're powerful as a journalist, it's the vestigial tail, right? We no longer have that. The distribution was taken over by tech around 2014, and then the political dominoes began to fall in 2016. The Philippines, the Petri dish line actually came from the Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, Chris Wiley. He said that countries like the Philippines were where companies like Cambridge Analytica tested these tactics of mass manipulation. And if it worked in our countries, the word he used is they ported it over to you. Here's the last part. And this is the 3 sentences I've said repeatedly over and over and over since 2016. I said it at the Nobel lecture, I'll say it again. Imagine if you have no facts, if lies spread faster than facts. So without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without trust, we have no shared reality. How can we solve any problem? I feel sorry for people in government, right? We have no democracy. And that, I think you'll see, Shoshana Zuboff, who named the business model that tore apart our shared reality, surveillance capitalism, that didn't happen until 2019. Right? She's coming out with a new book that basically says, you cannot have surveillance capitalism with democracy. You have to choose. And that's, so I just went all
There's a huge amount there, I think, for people to take it. And I'm sure we've got some very, very well-informed people in this audience. But my big concern actually, is certainly in this country, I don't know about the Philippines, I don't know whether people understand very much of this, about how much of this is going on. And what you just said there is like, this is the erosion of everything that we have. I think if you walked into the street out there now and said, do you think Facebook's the erosion of everything? What the hell are you talking about?
Yeah.
So, I mean, even people in the room, can you just explain the magnitude of the problem?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's existential. Right? I mean, we talk climate change. We know we will die if we all do not, that the world will die. But we can't solve that problem if our information ecosystem is corrupted. And the reason why if you walk outside, they may not know, because that's why it's insidious manipulation. Right? And I think it goes down to privacy. Because think about the system that we have. The social media platforms, technology, and it was started by American tech companies, but ByteDance, TikTok, is taking over. And if you think, if Facebook was a blunt mallet, TikTok is a surgical probe. So anything you put on social media, machine learning comes in and builds a model of you. Right? They claim that model, replace the word model with clone. So because they use machine learning, they claim your clone is now theirs. They own it. Imagine if you went to a hospital and you were cloned and then, this is you. And the hospital says, because we cloned you, we own you. That's the core of the problem, because then artificial intelligence comes in and takes all of our clones. Is there anyone in this room who is not on Facebook? Oh my God! That's a lot! That's great! Okay, sorry. I mean,
I don't know if they're on TikTok or Twitter. Is that?
Are you on TikTok or Twitter? Is anyone? You're not. Oh, you're very enlightened. You are on Twitter. Even after Elon Musk. Okay. okay. So is anyone in the room not on social media? Okay. So we are all on social media. So the basic problem is that when social media comes in and clones us, it takes that database and that clone knows you better than you know yourself, right? And that is the database for micro-targeting. Do not confuse micro-targeting with advertising, which is the old world. That's what we herald, right? Micro-targeting takes your weakest point, weakest moment to a message, and serves you that message, right? So it's almost like I went to a psychiatrist. Allison is my psychiatrist, and I tell her my deepest, darkest secret, what I'm most afraid of. Then Allison says, Julie, how much will you pay me for Maria's deepest, darkest secret? This is a privacy issue, right? But at the same time, it's an antitrust issue. It is a user safety issue. You cannot test drugs in this room and give this side drug A and this side drug B and see what happens. Oh, drug B killed you. I'm so sorry. That cannot be. There are laws against it. We're protected. So what happens? When that happens, that's the insidious manipulation. And the corollary question to that is, why? Because the end goal, the business model, surveillance capitalism, is meant to just keep you scrolling. And how? Our emotions. So the basic problem is our amygdala, fear, anger, hate. Our emotions are used to keep us scrolling, outrage, and change the way we think. Two systems of thinking of a human being, right? Thinking fast, thinking slowly, and the kind. So the thinking fast part is triggered, and it changes what you think in the real world. I mean, this is part of think this way. If you don't have integrity of facts, how do you have integrity of elections? And that ripples all the way through to the impact, 3 levels. Personal, what you think, what you believe, what you feel. Sociological, groups, how we as groups behave. And I started studying groups when I was looking at how the virulent ideology of Al-Qaeda spread. How did young men and women decide to be suicide bombers? In groups, we do things together that an individual does not. Right? We lose certain things. And then the last part, so in high school you would call it peer pressure, but in groups together, the crowd turns into a mob. like this. And you'll see this in the chapter on Indonesia, where after the fall of Suharto, I went from city to city to city, and there was one group trying to kill another, and the mobs were always full of the nicest people. It's strange. And the last part is that emergent human behavior. You know, as a species, when we are together at scale that tech allows, the worst of humanity is the behavior that is rewarded. So think to your family, you're raising your kids, and you are basically telling them, lie all the time, because that's how you get the most rewards. With an incentive structure like this, everything's corroded. Journalism, we don't stand a chance. We're not going to lie because we're legally liable, which means distribution-wise, our stories don't get the widest distribution. The incentive structure is against us.
So, I mean, at Rappler, so the news organisation that you set up with some of your colleagues, you were quite early adopters of social media, and you could see all those things that we all thought back then. This is an amazing force for good, that it can change the world. Talk us through how you first began to see the dangers of it.
After we published the weaponization of the internet.
But why did you publish that? So you clearly got worries.
Yeah. So I think the first time we really came under attack by government officials was when we reminded you of exactly how many people were killed in the drug war. Because it happened in plain sight. You know, one day it was 7,000, the next day it was rolled back to 2,500. And then there's the actual, how do you get access to officials? They give you access. What if we won't give you access until you roll it back? So we decided not to roll back the numbers. We decided to keep the numbers and to show its evolution. And you'll see this on Rappler. I'll tweet it afterwards, but it became very confusing. So that was the first one. The first casualty in our battle for facts was exactly how many people were killed in the drug war. You know, it went from the rollback to 2005, Amnesty International in January 2017 took 7,000, and then by December 2018, our Commission on Human Rights, the Philippine Commission on Human Rights, said it was at least 27,000 people killed. We don't know how many. After that, we did an impunity series because numbers, we know as journalists, numbers lose meaning, and that you need to care about the person. A 5-year-old girl who was killed because her grandfather was targeted, right? I think that was a tipping point for me, and it is in the book. But then beyond that, when we began to see this insidious manipulation, where it was free speech was being used to stifle free speech. And this I can tell you personally. After we published the 3-part series, I was pummeled with 90 hate messages per hour. 90 per hour. I'd never lived through anything like that. And I wasn't the only one attacked. Rappler, not by design, was 63% women, and the median age is 23 years old. So we were young and female, and the attacks against our journalists worried me far more than the attacks against me. So, and this is something, so long, right? We felt it. The impact was immediate in terms of safety, in terms of what's the end goal of all these attacks, and as we have learned afterwards, we were the first to quantify the data. Women journalists in the Philippines in 2017 were attacked at least 10 times more than men. But it was a 2017 conversation I had with Julie Bissett in all strange places, not Durban, in South Africa, where I didn't know what to do. Because it almost felt like I must be a bad journalist to be attacked this much. And at that point, she was doing a book for UNESCO, and she just said, the book says an attack on one is an attack on all. That was the title. And so she convinced me to first talk about it publicly, which was difficult. And now I think there are more than almost 200 journalists that you have spoken to, women journalists in particular. 73% of the women journalists said that they were attacked online. Of that, 25% received threats of physical violence, including death threats. And of that, you had 20%, which turned the online attacks, online violence, to real world violence. There's a direct link, and I guess that's the one thing I do believe is missing. It's this impunity online. We allow it to happen. We have democratic governments have allowed this, and yet there's only one world. We live in a real world which has a system, rule of law. But in our virtual world, there's absolute impunity. And when we are pummeled and bashed online, that has direct impact in the physical world.
So is the first step then to try and at least get to a point where there is some understanding and acceptance of what's actually going on? I think. So did you feel in the Philippines the first point was you had to make people aware of what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, the flip side of that is presumably a lot of your traffic and a lot of your revenue was coming from using Facebook to get the stories out there. So the people who are trying to keep you are also people paying you your wages.
Yes, so it's kind of like when you have a polluter of a river, they'll give you the product, but they'll pollute the river and ultimately kill you, right, if you drink the water. And that is the reality that we live with. Starting in 2018, medium-sized publishers globally, January 2018 was when Mark Zuckerberg decided, we're going to move news out. Remember, they tried a separate news feed, and we're going to have just friends and family. I mean, in the book, I'm pretty scathing about this because that is the perfect disaster for more disinformation, for more lies to spread if you do not have the facts. So they moved the facts out. What did that do to news groups? And it's actually the smaller news groups. I'm trying to remember, like Serbia, Slovakia, drops of 60%. In the West, you're slightly, because you have large markets, this is directly connected to money and power. You weren't as affected as countries in the global south, for example, or smaller markets. But the impact is really clear. So your question is, how do we do both, right? Rappler remains a Facebook fact-checking partner. We're one of two Filipino fact-checking partners, 3 if you include Agence France Presse, which works globally. But fact-checking is whack-a-mole. You know, there are millions, and Facebook will tell you exactly how many posts they will have a day. And when you fact-check, you're all the way downstream, right? It's like you scooped a glass of the polluted river, and then you said, I'm gonna clean up this glass. Who cares if you clean up the glass? The river is still polluted, right? So that's also why I feel like the next step is we have to go up, because the problem is not speech. It is the distribution of speech. It's the algorithms of distribution, that's mid. And then you go up to here, the mother lode, the data. Big data fundamentally changed our world. And I don't think we journalists do enough, right? This is our struggle all the time. And I gotta say, building tech is very expensive for a news organization, but we have to reclaim it. I think one of our biggest mistakes globally for news organizations is putting the share button on our sites, because we gave our data, our audience, our relationships to the platform.
So do you still put Rappler stories out through Facebook?
Yes. Yes. I mean, why? Because if you live online, social media is the only way to distribute, right? Unless I pull you all together in a room, which we do. Like when we created Rappler in 2012, I didn't set aside a marketing budget. What I did is, instead of marketing, we created a civic engagement team. Because I wanted real world impact.
Yes.
And the question always was, how do we measure impact? Our elevator pitch, when I was raising money in 2011, is we build communities of action, and the food we feed our communities is journalism. And so we always felt that we would have a small cadre, because I went from managing 1,000 journalists in the largest broadcaster of the Philippines to 12 people in Rappler, including me, where I was then the PA, the transcriber, you do everything, and creative, which was extremely exciting. But then we saw the potential. We used the wisdom of crowds. Remember, wisdom of crowds depends on individual will, right? That the crowd has, wisdom of crowds, James Suryaki's book, says that if the four elements are there, a crowd can be far more, can be brilliant, far smarter than an Einstein. And for a little while, I would say from 2012 to 2014, 2015, we had the wisdom of crowds. And then the greed, the surveillance capitalism model, the cloning, the use of our data for micro-targeting created far more money. It was like a license to print money at the cost of journalism and democracy.
And presumably the wisdom of crowds only work if people are getting facts.
Yes,
True.
absolutely. And the four things are, that they are different parts.
Yes.
They're not all in one. That they have independent ways of verifying the information. That you have a way to then pull back what they have, and then you have a way to actually measure it. Those are the four elements, and we used to have that in social media. From 2012 to 2016, we did a hashtag Project Agos, which is this climate change. We built a platform where we asked people who needed help. The Philippines in 2013 was the most disaster-prone, third most disaster-prone nation in the world. We get an average of 20 typhoons every year. So here's the line between journalism and advocacy. Our civic engagement team actually worked with government. Move PH is the name of our civic engagement team. They sat with the Office of Civil Defense, and we built a crowdsourcing map for the government. And it was used, so if you're stranded on top of a building, you can tweet. At that point, there was still geolocation on Twitter. You can tweet, and then the Red Cross, the government, the Office of Civil Defense could see your tweet pop up on the map. They immediately responded. And so we saved, and the goal was very clear. The goal is to take the thousands killed to hundreds and bring it to tens. And we accomplished that. So it is possible. And talk about the truest of true believers in social media. I had hoped that technology could actually jumpstart development in countries like mine in the global south. That was the hope of Rappler. And I think with legislation we can still go back to that. Why are we still with Facebook and Twitter? And yes, we're trying Mastodon, but really difficult, We're still with social media because there is no option. It's like the highway is broken, but that's your only road. So
do you feel that we've all been very let down by the legislators, the governments around the world?
I think the application of responsibility first was tech, because they could see the impact of this. And you'll read in the book when I alerted Facebook, we were alpha partners of Facebook. When I alerted them, I kind of the impact of it. And then the second application of responsibility are democratic governments. We have better business bureaus in the United States, for example. We have here in the UK, you have building codes.
Yeah.
Why do we not have building codes for our minds, our emotions?
And why are they so slow to it? I mean, we're struggling to get a couple of bits of legislation through here at the moment. But, I mean, this is like 20 years too late. Why? Is it just they don't understand it? What happened?
I think it's a combination of, in the US there's a $70 million tech lobby, right? So think about this like big tobacco. I think that when they know the harms, but the lure of the money is just so large. So when you say, this is a free speech issue, that is the defense of the tech companies. It is not a free speech issue, it's a distribution issue. A comedian, Sacha Baron Cohen, said this, he said, it's not, and if he got it, we all should get it. And so the other problem is, it is new, it's tech. And think about algorithm. The definition for this is opinion in code. Think about it like that. So, Allison, we can code you. Mm-hmm. They can code you, and they can just replicate one decision you make 1,000,000 times. Journalists have kind of an inherent, I don't like being replicated 1,000,000 times, because a journalist makes these standards and ethics decisions based on the context. And that is also part of it. So how do we I mean, ultimately, I think tech and journalism will combine. We just have to find a way to get there that is friendly to democracy and friendly to women and LGBTQ. Because if you're marginalized in the real world, you are further marginalized online.
So there's a big debate going on here at the moment about free speech, and I read a story in one of the broadsheets this week that said most important things when people say terrible things, you need disinfectant and fresh air and blah 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 blah. But which I thought was just again a great illustration that people just don't seem to understand that we're beyond fresh air,
Yes.
because the lies are getting replicated far quicker than the. And how do we make that? How do we? It's almost like first of all we need like a public awareness campaign. Why people were in.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we try to do in the Philippines, right? That weaponization of the internet series, it was so shocking to me that I actually brought it to my board and asked them to approve it. And I didn't realize that they could also then get charged criminal, because that's basically what happened, right? So my board unanimously approved our publication of it, and that was the beginning of all of the attacks against us. If we had never done this in the Philippines, I think we would be worse off today. Data, investigations, they're really boring. Facts are really boring, and we struggle. I'm sure you struggle with this, right? You spend a lot of money on investigations that are for the public good, and your reporters get pummeled for doing that, for asking these tough questions, and yet the public, partly because of the distribution system of social media, one, it doesn't get distributed, doesn't get the widest distribution, even though you spend the most money and it can do the best, the most good. And then the second part is, our business model is dead, right? The old advertising model of news, it cannot compete against the micro-targeting of this. I mean, it all sounds so bleak, but it isn't that bleak, right? We have to push through this, but I think it is by demanding accountability, by demanding an end to impunity, and that requires government action. So I would say the last 2 years I've spent a lot of time with the EU, because the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act are coming out. I think they get it. This is about the algorithms of amplification and transparency, something journalists, of course, do. Here in the UK, I mean, I gotta say, Damien Collins' the subcommittee report, the very first one, was the first global look, right? We could read about Nigeria there. These companies tested their tactics in countries like ours where rule of law is weak, where accountability is weak. So they did it with impunity, and if it worked, they then targeted you. So countries have to put guardrails in place, and this is how we can reclaim back the public sphere.
So you do in the book sort of talk about various different solutions that you can get to. So obviously legislation. Do you want to sort of talk about the other sort of messages of hope that you've got?
Yeah, there's so many. I mean, it sounds really bleak, right? First, I just want to make sure the problem is really clear in their head. And it was actually a biologist who encapsulated it for me, and then everything flowed from that. A guy named Eagle Wilson said that he studies emergent behavior of ants, right? So imagine emergent behavior of human beings now globally. He said that the greatest crisis we face is our Paleolithic emotions, our medieval institutions, and our godlike technology, right? That's where we are today, right? And this is creating humanity, emergent human behavior, affecting our species, encouraging the worst of who we are, and stifling the best of who we are. So where do we find hope? I find hope. We're still here. Rapper is still there. You can see it. You know it is. Doing the right thing is the right thing. Journalists have, in general, and you can see this globally. Journalists have done our jobs. The incentive structure of distributions has really messed things up, because in many ways the worst journalism gets the highest reward. I'm going to get clobbered for that. but if lies spread faster, right? Look at CrowdTangle on a daily basis, and you can kind of see that. When I was heading the largest news organization in the Philippines, our primetime newscast was where the battle was fought. And I know what gets your attention on the primetime newscast in the Philippines, the same that gets your attention here: crime and entertainment. And I always used to say in Rappler, we didn't even have sports. We started with investigative journalism. You know, we brought in sports, and then we brought in lifestyle entertainment. We called that the sugar that gets you in, and then we want to feed you vegetables, you know, and it worked. Hope. When Rappler came under attack in January 2018, when the government first tried to shut us down, I sat with about 100 of we did a General Assembly, GA, this is what we call our assembly, and median age 23, right? So we did a public announcement, we disagreed, we're not going to shut down, we were going to fight back. I forgot to tell our lawyers we were going to do a press conference, but we did. What I told our team was, everyone has a different risk level. And I said, you know, if you or your parents are afraid, tell us, and we will try to place you in a different news organization. And I have to tell you, not one of our editorial team wanted to leave. And you can talk to some of them. It was scary as hell, but it's almost like, you know, coal under the greatest pressure becomes a diamond. I mean, that's what I think. So where do I find hope? We're still here doing the right thing. The Nobel Prize helped journalists. I mean, look at what the Norwegian Nobel Committee did. Last year, they chose journalists. This year, they chose civil society. Belarus, Ukraine, Russia. These are the elements we need for democracy. I guess the last part is, you know, we did an experiment, a whole of society approach. You can read about it in the book. 4 layers. News organizations working together. We've been trying to do that since 2016, but we were competitors. So we finally, this year, did 16 news organizations. The data shows we all rose together. So the goal was do fact check a day. The second layer was civil society, NGOs. It's a distribution. We called it the mesh. And this included the church, business, finally, right? And we did kind of an influencer marketing for facts. And their task as the mesh layer is to share these really boring fact checks, but add emotion. And they couldn't use anger. And so what we found was inspiration spreads as fast as anger. The third layer are the academic institutions, the ones who can tear apart how you were being manipulated. And every week they did, but the fourth layer was the most important one. The lawyers, legal groups, from the left to the right, the Integrated Bar Association of the Philippines, the Philippine Bar Association, the Free Legal Association of the Philippines, the Free Legal Flag. What this showed us, that legal layer, the lawyers, we gotta get them in, because they were far more, well, one, they weren't as exhausted as the journalists. So they were far more aggressive, and in like about 3 months' time, they filed more than 21 tactical and strategic cases to protect the people trying to protect the facts. So that's one, right? Because long term, it's education. Medium term, it's legislation. Short term, it's hand-to-hand combat. Right? In the Nobel lecture, I called it a person-to-person defense of democracy. Up until we have this, journalists are defenseless in this. I mean, if there are British journalists who are pummeled, and you cannot do anything, what are you going to do? Say no, and then you just get pummeled more. So that's why the design of the information ecosystem needs to change. But last hope, this is the last 2 minutes. If you play basketball, last 2 minutes of democracy. Think about it like this, right? If you don't have integrity of facts, you don't have integrity of elections. So 2022 elections, what happened? Well, the Philippines, we in May elected a Marcos overwhelmingly, 36 years after a people power revolt ousted a man who had been in power for almost 21 years, who was one of the first kleptocrats, right? The Swiss banking system actually changed because of $10 billion in 1986. Well, we overwhelmingly elected his son. his end namesake, and it's an emblematic example of how history changes in front of your eyes. And for journalists, I became a journalist because information is power. This kind of power is difficult. It's like Milan Kundera revisited, you know, from the unbearable lightness of being. He said, the struggle of man against power is the struggle of memory against forgetting. This tech makes us forget, right? It is transformative. So then all the other elections, I mean, Brazil, 1% only, civil society came out, right? But only by 1%. That's very small, even connected to the statistical surveys. And the US, the midterms, Americans are saying, well, it's not as bad. It's still death by 1,000 cuts. We're still bleeding. Next year, you have Turkey, Nigeria, you have India beginning regional elections. 2024, that's the tipping point year. Last 2 minutes, you know, it's the EU has elections, but the big three for me are Indonesia, the world's largest Muslim population, where the front runner today is the son-in-law of former President Suharto. His name is Prabowo. It's a nostalgia for a past, for autocratic rule. Then India, the world's largest democracy, where Modi has held power since 2014. And then there's the United States. This is the last 2 minutes. It is time for us. I hope you walk out of here like, the last chapter, the title, the macro title is Why Fascism is Winning. And the subtitle is the personal lesson to fight this. Collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. This is it. This matters. So please walk out and do something.
Well, if that doesn't inspire everybody in here, there's so many millions more questions I would like to ask you. But anyway, I'll be selfish of me, so I'm going to open it up to the floor. So, we've got one right at the back to start with.
The one not on Facebook. It's global. It's any place in the world that holds elections, because we have the trappings of democracy, but if we are being insidiously manipulated by power. And so here's the other part of the last 2 minutes, right? If nothing is changed, if the tech continues, if our society, if we don't act like citizens and remain users or consumers, because we have to define what civic engagement is like in this age of exponential rise. So if nothing has changed, we will elect more illiberal leaders democratically. And what do? Like in my country in 2016, they crumble the institutions of democracy from within, and then they allied together. And Applebaum calls it autocracy Inc. I'd say kleptocracy Inc., right? Because it is power and money. And UK knows some of this stuff, you know, but that it changes the global power balance. That is why fascism is winning. So I'll give you one example. That is, so we talked about the manipulation of our information, but what about Pegasus, right? The surveillance that takes away our privacy. Because if you don't have privacy, you do have autocracy. 60% of the world now is living under autocratic rule. We have rolled back the number of democracies to 1989 levels. And journalists know this because we often are the first to come under attack in these countries. Perfect example is TikTok, right? The people who built this tech know that it is not only addictive, but it is dangerous. So Silicon Valley guys, those bros, they don't let their kids on these platforms. You're so smart. Because TikTok, you guys know there are two different versions of code of TikTok, right? There's code that is inside China. The one inside China that's used domestically is very child-friendly. It shuts off. If you're 14 years old and below, it shuts off. There's a limit to how much you can stay on TikTok if you're 14 years old and below. And they add educational videos in there. My friend Tristan Harris actually pushed this together. He said China's code for its own kids and its audience domestically is the spinach version, and then they export it to the rest of the world, the opioid version, right? Remember, it's about meaning. Where you spend your time is what gives your life meaning, your search for identity. And if you are spending your time on these platforms that, I mean, think about what do you get in return? Spoken by the woman who is not on Facebook, right? So it is, I think it's dangerous for every human being. Because let me flip it around to the positives of what we've learned from the tech. Their insidious manipulation. What I learned is that we all, as human beings, have far more in common than we have differences. As a reporter, I used to think I had to learn the different cultures and the different languages. Well, no. These platforms were able to manipulate all of us, regardless of culture or nation, with the exact same thing. So we're very identical in biology, and it affects the way we look and act in the real world.
Do you think something like Mark Zuckerberg intentionally isn't making the changes that we need to make because he wants the power, he wants the money, he wants to? Or do you think it's just this sort of misunderstanding of what's going on?
I think misunderstanding would have worked from maybe 2016 to 2017, maybe 1 year, right? I mean, I joined CNN when it was chicken noodle news. We grew very fast, and I could see the shifts that needed to happen. So I was very sympathetic, right? You have a startup that then became global.
Yeah.
But once you have evidence of genocide in Myanmar, once you have evidence of the toxicity, the social harms for young girls, you cannot ignore that, you know. And again, I go back to like,
what are they doing about it? Are they just bad people?
Let me put it this way. I don't like judging in this way, but I will say, you know, when you're running a business, there's a line between amoral, immoral, and evil. And you and your conscience, you choose. So I believe that there's enough evidence. I mean, Frances Haugen released more than 10,000 internal documents of Facebook. Like I said, we're still partners, we're frenemies. They have to be part of the solution, but it's very clear that legislation needs to kick in. Because the impact of this, if you guys haven't read, Sheila Lamke wrote a book called Dopamine Nation, right? This stuff is toxic, and the kind of people we become. I said this in the Nobel lecture. I pulled out a T-shirt that we had in Rappler from 2014, where it says, you know, in orange it says "Be the good," but in order to be the good, you have to believe there is good in the world. And what social media has done is it has killed the goodness of humanity. I mean, it is there, and you don't really hear journalists say this often enough. Because when I would go to these disasters all around the world, and people pull together, people help each other, right? And that's the part. I always say, if you're my generation, there's this old cartoon, because it's about an individual battle for integrity. And in the cartoon, there's a person trying to make a tough call, you know, and the devil is here on your right telling you, do it. You're going to get so much from it. And then there's the angel on your left shoulder saying, don't do it. You're going to be hurting someone. It's lying. So what social media did is it gagged the angel and flicked it off your shoulder. And then it grew the devil and gave it a direct line into your neural system, into your nervous system. This is not us. I don't believe those are the values of Filipinos. I don't believe it is okay to kill. We were one of the first signatories to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I don't believe this. I will, of course, if I'm wrong, I could go to jail for the rest of my life, but you know, this is why. I mean, Ukrainians are fighting, literally, hand-to-hand combat, right? So there are many, many people globally now that have been forced to ask, what are you willing to sacrifice for these values, for facts, for democracy?
Another question? Oh,
yeah, thank you so much, Marie. It's fascinating everything you say. Just wondering, if you could pass 3 pieces of legislation to curb the power of social media platforms tomorrow, what is that wish list? What would you do?
Oh, I love your question. Thank you. And I feel your energy. You know, we actually, in September, Dmitry Muratov and I, along with there are a dozen Nobel laureates, plus about 100 civil society groups working on this, we released a 10-point action plan. And that 10-point action plan boils down to just 3 buckets. Bucket number 1, stop surveillance for profit. Right? That includes Pegasus and Predator, you know, these things that Citizen Lab and Amnesty International exposed. I don't know if you've gotten your phone checked, you should have as editor, right? So there's stop surveillance for profit, bucket 1. Bucket 2, stop coded bias. You guys familiar, there's a film that came out in January 2020, it's called Coded Bias, and she was a Kenyan-Canadian woman who was at MIT, who was given an AI assignment. But when she turned on the assignment, the AI couldn't read her face because she was a woman and she's black. And so she finally got to do the assignment after she put a white face on. Stop coded bias, because LGBTQ, women, if you were marginalized, if we were marginalized before, we're further marginalized in the code. That's 2. 3, for all the journalists in the room. Journalism as an antidote to tyranny. Please do not ever compare us to influencers. We train really hard. We have standards and ethics manuals that lets one of our reporters stand up and ask really tough questions, and they get pummeled. We get pummeled for this. That's the mission of journalism is even more important. Those 3 buckets.
That's an excellent answer, by the way. Oh, sorry, would you like to go? And I'll come to you guys. Sorry. Did you want to go?
Yes, hi. I saw your interview with Brittany Kaiser after the
Thank
release
you.
of
Yes.
the Great Hack in July 2018 or 2020, I believe. She was talking about something that when you were asking her about the data that was available, she said that the governments were sitting on vast amounts of data, and they were coming to Cambridge Analytica with, saying, what can we do with it? What can you give us? And she said that and when they were talking to these different governments, some people said they had true intentions, like good intentions to better the lives of their people, and obviously some wanted power, like majority of
Yes.
us know. Can you give us an example of, if you've seen, if you have a pinch of people who actually had good intentions, just for people who, because as I said, the fake news as well as news that triggers spreads much faster, triggers people, which is mostly bad news.
Yes.
But, I think we all would benefit from some good and maybe examples that could inspire.
Yeah, and there are. So I just accepted, I sit on the high-level panel for the Internet Governance Forum of the UN to the Secretary General. And one of the examples of where data is used for good is Estonia, right? They turned data, the government, into digital. Because you have to have that, but they also protected the privacy of citizens. Why? If there is a cop who wants your license number, before they actually do that, you are notified, right? So you ultimately, it's this idea that freedom, free will comes from your ability to have agency. And so that's, if you look at Estonia, Thomas Ilves, I think, is the guy who did this, and he's part of the Internet Governance Forum, I believe, and he talks about how they do that. So this is a government that tries, because there's a ton of stuff you can do for good. These are the things we were excited about in Rappler, right? Because at scale, it could actually be, but the question, of course, is who pays for it? Because if we leave it in commercial hands, it's predatory. And we've seen this already, right? So some of the problems, for example, I'm going to take a little sidebar for the times that human beings have been commodified and what happened. So this also hopefully gives us hope. In the 18th and 19th century, the labor was the commodity. When business then found factory lines, and then you had child labor, you had sweatshops, you had Charles Dickens, you had Oliver, there's that, and what happened? Laws were put in place. And those robber barons are the very same people who gave money back for education, right, of a generation that was exploited. The second time now is this, and the woman who wrote Surveillance Capitalism compares this market of our attention and behavior to the slave trade. And she says it should be outlawed. I'll go a little bit, maybe I do say outlaw also, but I feel like this attention economy not only commodifies news, not only commodifies our thinking, which then gets rid of privacy. Right? If you think about it, when you get rid of privacy, the autocrat always wins. And so in this one, what do we need to do? We need to stop surveillance for profit. That's the first step. You need to give us agency back. And look, maybe we will give our clones, we will sell our clones to these companies. But in the global south, that will feed people, and then it'll bring down the profits just a little bit. So back to your question of, there are other places, these are now experiments, and the big problem that I see is unless they're government, there is no business model to fund it. Perfect example right now is Twitter. When did one man who hasn't been elected, Twitter is essentially the global public sphere, right? There are lots of upsides. The Iranian women running their campaign, Me Too. These upsides are still there despite the bad. But who will pay for it? Right? Will a government, there was discussion at some point of trying to hold Elon Musk. He paid for it. So now power and money trumps everything. Sorry, I realized I went into the negative side. I know, I'm sorry. Help me be positive, please.
Let's look at that there.
Hi, I'll just stand so you can hear me. I was just wondering about your thoughts on TikTok, because obviously with the recent Marcos election, that's how they got a lot of information out, and that's how they persuaded people to vote. And even though they have less restrictions outside of China, inadvertently they are the kind of news platform that young people go to get educated. Not me though.
Please don't.
Yeah, but I was just wondering, do you think that journalists should engage in TikTok? Should they have personalities on there? Should newsrooms have, their profiles on there so they can help dispel information? Is that up to them?
You walked right into the biggest debate in rappers. And our young, Leanne does TikTok. I do not have a TikTok account, right? And so this is our biggest debate, and I don't know what you guys do, but, Rappler is on TikTok. I am not. I think, so let me answer that question with tactical and then strategic. Tactically right now, before the elections, there were 39 million Filipinos on TikTok. It was actually YouTube where a lot of disinformation also was coming about changing history, and you could see the spike when you put the data. Marcos changed from a pariah to a hero. Now, some of our reporters would go, and I went into some of the poorer areas of the Philippines and ask, why did you vote for Marcos? And the response was, this is a simple one, because I will get gold. Really? Where did you get that from? YouTube. So this is distribution. And what was so interesting is it's a meta-narrative way of explaining the wealth of the Marcoses and how they would give it back to the people. Okay, so back to your question. It is still being resolved, but tactically, our team, and unlike the way that our propaganda machine does it. I no longer have an editorial role in Rappler, because when I started getting attacked by the government, I didn't feel like I handled business and data and tech. So our editorial team has decided that they would go on TikTok. Even though I can say, but, and it does it drive? Because this is a different time from the argument of Facebook where you build engagement. Because look at the flattening of meaning. Engagement used to mean real things. Now it's a tick, which doesn't mean anything anymore, right? ByteDance, the company behind TikTok, one of the court filings in the United States was recently they exposed some of the things that were there, and Facebook admitted that ByteDance was one of its top advertisers between 2014 and 2018. Right? So again, I think like if Facebook was a mallet, TikTok is a direct thing. Plus, like most Chinese companies, also a direct line to the government. That opioid and spinach version, right, actually aligns with the CCP's goals. Because the United States, well, now let's talk Russian disinformation, because the data is out there, released in a 1,000-page Mueller report, which, by the way, if you're interested, go look through the footnotes of that, right? In the Mueller report, you actually saw that the IRA and the GRU, the intelligence agency of Russia, that they actually didn't want you to believe in one thing. They pounded both sides of Black Lives Matter. They opened identity fracture lines because how was America weakened? It began to fight amongst itself. These American companies gave what would have been Russian, the propaganda has always been there, we know this, but they never had access to individuals. They never could affect the cellular level of democracy. Now you can. So the roundabout way answer to the question you have is that I think this is also part of geopolitical power play. And we need to be careful who has our data. But I couldn't even convince Rappler to stay up. Sorry. Tactical and strategic, yeah.
Oh, so I'll take that one there and then I'll straight off. Sorry, there we go.
Hi, Julia. Thank you very much for your time. So I think my question is related to what you just asked. Should journalists and media organizations engage with social media platforms? So I run a news website for Filipinos in the UK, and what I was really disturbed to find out that we have two Facebook only and YouTube only based outlets, Filipino-run news outlets for Filipinos in the UK, and they're only on Facebook and YouTube. So when I started Tinig UK, I decided I don't want to go on social media. I want to build a proper website, and it's the most basic, most simple, because I want to move people away from Facebook. As it stands today, there are at least, 100 Facebook groups of Filipinos in the UK. That's where they interact. So I think this is coming from the perspective of an immigrant Filipino, whether that's in the UK or other parts of the world, where Facebook is where you do everything. Communicate with your friends, while also looking at the news of neighbors, co-workers. So it's really a challenge for me, somebody who's running a small outlet, not to engage with Facebook and Twitter. And as you said, TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, but I think it's a real challenge that Filipinos, this is where they do everything. They combine, relating family to finding out what's going on in the Philippines. So I think my question really to you is when you said, how do you approach this problem? And you said, the long term, it's education. So I was speaking to a friend, a Filipino friend who said, the problem with media is that they're constantly attacking the government. I said, that's their job. That's their job. So I think for many Filipinos, we have a different understanding of how the media works. So I think, what you said about education as a long-term approach, I think we should, I don't know, how do you propose to do it now? I know it's hand-to-hand contact, but you also need to know, I think it's a challenge, I think educating Filipinos on how to, engage with information, engage with discussions, because that's not what we do as a culture, as a society. So
No, thank you. Thank you for the question, and I'll give you like 3 responses to this. I think the first one is that it is happening right now. We need to move into the real world, and we need to actually physically come back post-COVID. I mean, part of the reason the extreme growth also is we were also extremely isolated from each other. So one of the things we're doing now as Filipinos get vaccinated is our civic engagement arm is going back, right? We have 3 pillars: tech, journalism, community. On the technology part, we're literally building, I went from 0 to very little for legal fees to 30% of our operating expenses go into legal fees. And yet, what we do is we save enough. You'll see in the book, one of the things is, Nietzsche's quote is also right, by the way: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And so what we did is, we're building tech, slowly but surely, but I hope to roll it out. It's a tech platform to build communities of action, and we hope to finish this by Q1 next year. And the literal goal is to connect us and to provide a safe space to have debates, right? That it is not a gladiator's battle to the death. I think that one of the biggest problems, even for journalists, is that we tend to focus on the politics and deal with the kind of cascading failure rather than the original problem. We fall into the political battle. Facebook did this. They refused to say that most of the disinformation was coming from the right? What's coming from? They refused to say it. A journalist would say it. Here's where I think it came from. Duterte and Marcos networks were spreading disinformation, and we exposed it. Of course, we got pummeled for it, right? So tech, at first, demand better tech. Organize your civil society groups, right? Because this is the impact on the next generation is huge. I can't even begin to quantify it. The second is journalism. We're like putting our finger in the dam. It's about to collapse, but we're still doing it. We need to keep doing good journalism. And it can't be determined by surveillance capitalism, because the distribution system of these platforms encourage bad journalism. And this is a problem. We struggle with this all the time. And so part of it is we're trying to look for new business models. And we have. We should already have shut down by the end of 2018, but we found a sustainable business model that is not advertising in the old sense, nor is it the insidious manipulation. The third is the most important one: community. We went and reached to our communities. Build your community in the real world. Like last night I did Tortoise, and they actually physically and virtually, we can do this combined now. Hold your community together, because in the end, this is how we're going to maintain the goodness of human nature. This is how we're going to have integrity of facts. Community is critical. And advocating, we don't only live in the virtual world, I guess is what I'm saying. It's very dangerous to use that as the indicator of success, but there are real economic impact if you're not on it. So it's tough. It's like taking a little poison at a time, right? How much can we take and still be who we are, versus, because you can't be, it's hard to be a purist. It's like saying, I'm not going to take any pollution in. We're breathing polluted air right now, and we have to be healthy enough, and we need to then organize. I sound like an activist. I'm a journalist. We now have to, because it's information. When it became a battle of facts, journalism became activism, and we need to look at all these different things. We need the civil society groups that are arguing for laws, right? We need to do this. Otherwise, we will lose the last 2 minutes.
And I think one final question. Is it? Yes.
Hi, first of all, thank you very much. I guess I have one question about TikTok and then a second summary kind of question. The first is, I'm really interested to hear about what Rafa's experience of being on TikTok has been so far. And secondly, I'm really disappointed to hear I'm on most social media. And
part of the solution, but not if the guideposts aren't in place, right? So, okay, so there's three things that you made me think of. I think the first is that in terms of TikTok, our debate is really the impacts. We don't make decisions in a vacuum, right? Because of TikTok's success. Have you guys seen YouTube Shorts? These companies, these commercial companies are moving into that same space because it is a race to the bottom. Like, let's first acknowledge that, right? So all of a sudden, what happens to like documentaries, like Frontline, for example, PBS, right? And guess what? We don't only want to watch people dancing or to watch a TikTok video, but yet that is what we are being fed. That's the difference, because these algorithms deliver it to us. Right? Radicalization happens because I have a son of a friend who's 12 years old, and he was being fed white supremacy videos. Right? This is not something they look for. Okay, you already know the negatives that I've put in place. And it will get worse as the drive for revenues drive these platforms. Facebook is doing the same thing. So they're following TikTok. That's a formula for disaster, I believe, right? Having said that, the solution, I think, is in our communities. And sometimes I feel like I grasp for straws, but Rappler could not have survived the last 6 years if our communities didn't jump in. In the book, I actually say, you jump and you have to trust. And we did trust, and our communities came through for us, not just in the Philippines, but globally. I mean, look at all the disasters globally, and yet you cared enough to just help us. We care enough about Brazil, because if we don't focus on Brazil, Amazon, I mean, and all of that. I guess this is that. Okay, quick answer then for your question is that it's a whack-a-mole game at the individual level. That's also why we need to come together and demand the Pareto principle, the 20% action that will deliver 80% of the results. Let's not focus on the polluted glass of water. Let's focus on I can't even begin to think about fixing our information ecosystem just by fact-checking alone. Because we will be like on an eternal treadmill. That's really Sisyphus, if we don't fix the business model first. And frankly, easy come, easy go. We thought that tech was going to build unicorns. Guess what? We go back to the real world sustainable business practices. And that impunity that has been there should be stopped. Sorry. I know I went back, because I feel like individually, all we can do is come together and demand better. That's not all, that's a lot. UK has great power, but everyone is doing UK. And there are the two big things are, in the real world, the rise of kleptocracy, Inc. Oh Lord, and in the virtual world, the nervous system of lies, actually I'm going to say, and this is not a political thing, what we are seeing is an ecosystem that is pushed. Russian disinformation triggered it, but now it's joined by Iran, by all of the illiberal governments. That's the nervous system online. Right? So it isn't just the content. Don't move away from the content. Look at disinformation, last thing I'll say, as the bullet that is delivered by information operations or information warfare. Yuri Andropov, a former KGB chairman, so information warfare is part of the Russian military doctrine. Yuri Andropov said, disinformatia is like cocaine. You take it once or twice, you're okay. But if you take it all the time, you become a changed person. We have been changed, and we need to come back to get to a healthy place. We need to stop and bandage the 1,000 cuts that we have.
Maria, I think we speak on half of the room. That was just incredible. I think there is so much to be worried about. There is so much anxiety around this issue, but I think that you've been able to sort of name all of the worries that we've got in front of us, but also offered some hope, which is so important. And I think that's what everyone wants today, the idea that there is some hope that we can find ways through this if we do work together. So thank you so much. I know your schedule is off the scale, and for squeezing this in this morning, I can't tell you how grateful we are, and for all the people here. And thanks also to the University of Westminster for this amazing room. Thank you so much, Journalist Charity, who helped us on the teas and coffees, to Sonia and Barbara from Women in Journalism, who first made contact with you. We were doing a series about hero journalists, and you were the first one we chose, and then you got the Nobel Peace Prize a week later.
That's a shame.
Please do keep in touch for more events, and I hope the rest of your trip goes really, really well. So, thank you.